Julian Thorne had it all: a partner position at his own firm, a wife with a billion-dollar name, and a secret. His secret was Ilara, a young, naive artist he kept in a charming little apartment. She was his plaything, his ball. Tonight he was taking her to the most exclusive charity event of the year, right under his wife's nose. He thought it was the ultimate display of his power, but his game was over before it began. He thought she was his mistress. Then she stepped off Damien Lazaridis' private Gulfstream jet. Julian Thorne checked his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass of his corner office. 48 floors above Manhattan, he wasn't just a man. He was a monument to his own success. Julian, managing partner of Thorne and Harding Capital, was the shark other sharks avoided. He straightened the knot of his Brioni tie, a gift from a client he'd saved, or perhaps more accurately, a client he'd successfully fleeced. His success was a skyscraper built on loopholes, ruthless leverage, and his wife's name. Ah, Catherine Davenport Thorne. Her family was New York. They hadn't just come over on the Mayflower. They'd practically financed the voyage. Julian, by contrast, had clawed his way up from a background he'd surgically removed from his history. He loved Catherine, or at least he loved the access and stability she represented. She was elegant, intelligent, and after 15 years, breathtakingly predictable. Her passion wasn't for him, but for her causes, the galas, the benefits, the endless virtuous cycle of asking rich people for money to give to other people, which brought him to tonight. The Metropolitan Benefactors Ball, the single most difficult ticket to get in the city, held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza. Catherine naturally was the chairwoman, and Julian, a man who survived on risk, was bored. Boredom for Julian was a physical ache. It was a void that needed to be filled, and for the past 6 months, he'd filled it with Ilara Vance. He'd discovered her at a small, achingly hip gallery opening in Chelsea. She was pretending to understand a piece of art that looked like a pile of reclaimed lumber. She was all wide, vulnerable eyes, messy bun, and a quick, intelligent wit. She claimed to be a struggling artist, supplementing her income as a gallery assistant. She was, in a word, perfect. She was the antithesis of his structured, opulent life. She was his escape. He'd set her up in a sleek, modern apartment in the East Village, a place Catherine would never ever step foot. He visited her twice a week. He loved the anonymity of it. He loved educating her. He'd buy her expensive wine and laugh internally as she pretended to taste the notes of tobacco and leather. He loved how she looked at him like he was a god, a titan who had descended from Olympus to grace her with his presence. He called her his little ball, a play on her name and her role in his life. She was something to be played with, admired, and put back in her box. Tonight he was taking his game to a new level. "You're sure about this, Julian?" she had asked him over the phone just last night, her voice a perfect blend of awe and fear. "Of course," he'd soothed, pacing his office. "You'll be my personal assistant for the evening. You'll have a credential. You just assist me. You get to see how the other half lives." The sheer glorious arrogance of it was intoxicating. He was smuggling his mistress into the most high-profile event of the year, an event hosted by his wife. It was a monument to his control. "What do I wear?" she'd whispered. Julian had smiled. He'd had his personal shopper at Saks send her 3 dresses. "I transferred a bonus to your account. Buy something simple, Ilara. A tasteful navy, perhaps? Don't try too hard. You're just staff. Remember, the goal is to blend in." He heard her take a sharp breath. "A bonus, Julian. This is too much. It's more than I make in 3 months." "Think nothing of it, my dear," he'd said, already checking his emails. Just be at the service entrance at 7:30 p.m. sharp. And remember the rules, we don't know each other. Not really. You are Ms. Vance, my assistant. Got it? Got it, Mr. Thorne? He loved it when she called him that. Now, hours later, he was fastening the cufflinks on his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. They were Cartier, a matching set with Catherine's earrings. He walked into their cavernous bedroom. Catherine was standing in front of a mirror, a vision in emerald green silk. "You look magnificent, darling," Julian said, kissing her bare shoulder. "Thank you, Julian." She was distracted, pinning a diamond brooch to her gown. "Is everything set for your presentation?" "Presentation." The Lazaridis Fund. "You said you were hoping to finally corner someone from their team tonight. They bought a table, you know. 10 seats. Julian's pulse quickened. The Lazaridis Fund. The White Whale. A reclusive, almost mythical private equity firm run by the even more reclusive Damien Lazaridis. They managed hundreds of billions, and they never attended these things. A 10-seat table was a $250,000 donation just for appetizers. "I heard a rumor," Julian said, feigning casualness. "But Lazaridis himself won't be there. He never is. It'll be some junior VP. "Still," Catherine said, "make us proud. The new children's hospital wing depends on it." "Of course, darling. I'll be on my best behavior." He offered his arm. As they descended in the private elevator of their penthouse, Julian checked the slim burner phone in his pocket. One message. From Ilara. "I'm so nervous. I feel like Cinderella." Julian smiled. "Don't worry," he typed back. "Just wait for me. And remember Cinderella at midnight. You're still mine. Tushbas." He silenced the phone, his blood humming with a dangerous, perfect cocktail of power, risk, and anticipation. He was in complete control of his universe. The plaza's grand ballroom was a sea of calculated opulence. Light from the massive crystal chandeliers fractured across $1 billion worth of jewelry. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of old money and new power. Julian was in his element. "Senator, a pleasure," he boomed, clapping a man on the back. "Julian, Catherine, you've outdone yourselves. This room, it's all Catherine," Julian said, deflecting with practiced charm. "I'm just the arm candy." Catherine laughed lightly, already scanning the room for her key donors. "Julian, darling, I need to go greet the Astors. Can you mingle? And please try to be nice to the tech crowd. They may not know which fork to use, but they write the biggest checks." "I'll be the perfect gentleman," he promised. She kissed his cheek and was absorbed into the crowd. Julian's smile remained, but his eyes went cold. He was on the hunt. He navigated the room with the predatory grace of a shark, shaking hands, making quiet promises, and gauging the power dynamics of every cluster of guests. He saw his partners from the firm, Harding and Walsh, holding court by the bar. He nodded, but didn't approach. Tonight he was a lone wolf. His first priority was the Lazaridis table. It was in the dead center of the room, the best real estate. And as Catherine had said, it was empty. All 10 seats. A placeholder card engraved with the firm's stark minimalist logo was the only occupant. Julian felt a familiar prickle of annoyance. He hated it when people bought tables and didn't show. It was a power move, a way of saying, "My $250,000 is meaningless, and so are all of you." It was a move he respected, but it complicated his plans. He checked his real phone. 8:15 p.m. Then he checked his burner. No new messages from Ilara. She was supposed to be here 45 minutes ago. He made his excuses to a passing socialite and slipped through a discreet, velvet-curtained archway into the service corridor. The clang of plates and the frantic energy of the catering staff were a harsh contrast to the ballroom's composed elegance. He pulled out the burner. "Where are you?" He sent the text. He waited. 1 minute, 2. The green delivered checkmark stared back at him. No read. Irritation, hot and sharp, flared in his chest. He was Julian Thorne. He did not wait. She was a gallery assistant. She was his guest, his secret. Her one and only job tonight was to be exactly where he told her to be when he told her to be there. This was insubordination. He pictured her stuck in traffic in a taxi, her cheap navy dress, wrinkled her hair frizzing in the humidity. The image was pathetic. He'd have to scold her later. The thought of her apology, the tears he knew he could summon with a single harsh word, calmed him slightly. He was about to dial her number when his other phone, his real phone, buzzed. It was his partner, Harding. "You see, this Lazaridis is coming, not a rumor." Julian's head snapped up. He pocketed the burner phone, Ilara completely forgotten. This changed everything. He strode back into the ballroom, his eyes fixed on the grand staircase. He saw Catherine near the entrance, her face flushed with excitement. She was talking to the head of hotel security. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The background hum of conversation had quieted. People were looking toward the main doors. "They just landed," Julian heard someone whisper. "Teterboro." "Who? Lazaridis? Himself? He's never been to a public event." "Not in a decade." Julian smoothed his tuxedo jacket. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. This was it. Landing the Lazaridis Fund was the final piece. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the prestige. It would elevate him from a mere rainmaker to a legend. It would finally make the Davenport name secondary to the Thorne name. He began to move toward the entrance, composing his opening lines, calculating his angle of approach. He'd be deferential, but not weak, knowledgeable but not arrogant. He would be, in short, irresistible. The orchestra, which had been playing a listless Vivaldi, suddenly paused. A new, more profound silence fell. The main doors of the ballroom, 20 feet tall and carved from rich mahogany, were being opened. Not by the staff, but by 2 men in dark, severe suits with earpieces. This wasn't an entrance, it was a coronation. The silence in the grand ballroom stretched, becoming heavy and electric. Julian stood paralyzed 20 feet from the entrance, caught between his wife and the most important potential client of his life. He watched Catherine, who was clutching her hands together, her socialite smile replaced with a look of genuine nervous awe. This was not a donor she could charm. This was royalty. The first to enter was a man who seemed to absorb the light in the room. He was tall, perhaps 60, with a shock of silver hair and a face that looked carved from granite. He wore a simple, impossibly dark suit that must have cost more than Julian's car. His eyes, deep-set and intelligent, scanned the room with a look of profound, almost predatory boredom. This had to be Damien Lazaridis. He radiated an aura of absolute, indisputable power. Julian felt a bead of sweat trace a line down his spine. He'd met presidents, senators, and titans of industry. None of them had this gravity. Lazaridis paused at the top of the short staircase, taking in the room. The cameras, which had been respectfully lowered, began to flash in a frantic, desperate volley. He didn't blink. He seemed to find the entire spectacle distasteful. Julian started to take a step forward, his rehearsed greeting on his lips. But Lazaridis didn't move. He turned back, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, and extended his hand. And then she appeared. The woman who took his hand and stepped into the light was not a woman. She was an event. Julian's brain simply stopped. He couldn't process the information. He was looking at Elara. But it was not Elara. It was a spectre, an imposter, a stranger wearing her face. The struggling artist was gone. The messy bun, the cheap cotton dresses, the vulnerable, wide-eyed look of a girl needing rescue, all of it had evaporated. The woman on Damien Lazaridis's arm was a queen. Her hair was not in a charming bun. It was pulled back in a severe, wet-look chignon that highlighted the terrifying perfection of her cheekbones. Her makeup was minimalist, save for a slash of blood-red lipstick. She was wearing a gown, but to call it a dress was an insult. It was a piece of architecture, a custom Schiaparelli creation of midnight blue velvet with an asymmetrical razor-sharp neckline and a sculpted gold breastplate that looked like armor. And around her neck, gleaming with a cold blue-white fire that dwarfed every other diamond in the room, was a necklace Julian recognized from a Sotheby's auction catalogue. It was the Lazaridis star, a 70-carat flawless diamond that was rumored to be priceless. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't awed. She looked, if anything, faintly annoyed. Julian couldn't feel his hands. He couldn't feel his feet. The room was tilting, the sound of the orchestra rushing back in, warped and distorted as if underwater. This isn't real. It's a joke, a coincidence. It's a look-alike. But he knew her face. He knew the precise curve of her jaw, the small mole just above her lip that he had kissed 100 times. This was Elara. She saw him. Across the vast, crowded ballroom, her eyes cold, clear, and utterly devoid of recognition, swept past him, dismissed him, and then snapped back. Her gaze locked onto his. Julian felt the connection like a physical blow. He expected something. Panic. Fear. A flash of, "Oh God, I'm caught." He got nothing. Her expression did not change, not by a single flicker of an eyelash. She held his gaze for a full 3 seconds, a lifetime in which Julian's entire world, the one he'd so carefully constructed, shattered into a million silent pieces. Then, with an almost imperceptible quirk of her perfect blood-red lip, she looked away. She turned to Lazaridis and whispered something in his ear. Damien Lazaridis looked directly at Julian and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a lion just before the lunge. The foundation of Julian's life, the bedrock of his arrogance, crumbled into dust. He had thought he was the player. He hadn't even seen the board. "Damien, my goodness." Catherine's voice, high and bright, cut through Julian's paralysis. He watched as if in a nightmare, as his wife glided toward the most powerful man in the room, and the woman who had been in his bed 48 hours earlier. "Catherine, you're a vision," Lazaridis said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble with a faint, unplaceable European accent. He kissed her hand, a gesture of old-world charm that was almost menacing. "We are so honored to have you. We truly didn't expect." "I am rarely honored," Lazaridis said, his eyes scanning the room. "But my colleague insisted. She has been instrumental in arranging our new philanthropic ventures. You know, of course, E.A. Vance." Julian's blood turned to ice. E.A. Vance. Not Elara. "E.A. Ms. Vance," Catherine gushed, taking Elara's hand. "We've spoken on the phone a dozen times. It is such a pleasure to finally meet you in person. What you're doing for the new hospital wing, it's a privilege, Mrs. Thorne," Elara said. Julian's knees buckled. Her voice, it was gone. The breathless, slightly high-pitched, girlish tone was gone. This voice was a low, cool alto. It was polished, precise, and carried the effortless authority of someone who had never been told no in her life. It was the voice of the establishment. The Lazaridis Fund is simply thrilled to be your lead partner on this, Elara continued. She looked at Catherine, her smile warm, but her eyes pure ice. Julian couldn't move. He was a statue. Lead partner, the hospital wing, that was Catherine's project. That was his wife's project. He'd dismissed it as charity nonsense. And this, Catherine said, finally remembering him, is my husband, Julian. Julian, come here. She was beaming, oblivious. She was a lamb, proudly introducing the wolf to the farmer. Julian's feet felt like lead. He walked the 10 steps toward the trio. Every eye in the room was on them, on her. He could feel the whispers. Who is that? That's E.A. Vance. They call her the Lazaridis Blade. She's the one who really runs the fund. He stood before her. The woman he had patronized, the woman he had sent a generous allowance for a tasteful navy dress. She was wearing a piece of couture art and a diamond that could buy his entire firm. Julian, this is E.A. Vance. Miss Vance, my husband, Julian Thorne. Elara extended a cool, gloved hand. Her glove was fine, black leather, stopping at the wrist. Julian, his hand trembling, took it. Her grip was firm, brief, and cold as marble. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice smooth as silk. It is a distinct pleasure. She looked him directly in the eye. The void was still there, but now he could see something behind it. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was amusement. A cold, intellectual, reptilian amusement. I've heard so much about you, she added. The double meaning hung in the air between them, a glittering, poisoned blade. Julian opened his mouth. No sound came out. He just stared, his mind, a roaring white static. Julian is in finance, too, Catherine chimed in, blissfully unaware. Thorne and Harding Capital. He's the managing partner. Oh, I know, Elara said, her gaze never leaving Julian's. We're intimately familiar with your firm's work, Mr. Thorne. In fact, I was hoping we might have a moment to chat later. There are a few discrepancies we'd love to discuss. Lazaridis, who had been watching this exchange with the keen interest of a hawk, finally spoke. Elara, they're seating us. He placed a possessive paternal hand on the small of her back. She gave Julian one last, devastatingly polite nod, and then turned. Julian was left standing there, his hand still tingling from her cold touch. He watched her walk away. He watched the entire room part for her. He watched her take her seat at the center table, a queen ascending her throne. He had thought she was a ball. He finally truly understood. He was the ball, and she had just kicked him into the abyss. Julian didn't remember the next hour. He remembered fragments, the taste of scotch, bitter and burning, the sound of his wife's laughter, which suddenly sounded shrill, the faces of his partners, Harding and Walsh, staring at him from across the room with expressions he couldn't decipher. Were they impressed he was talking to the Lazaridis table, or did they know he had to talk to her? He was on his 4th whiskey, neat from a trembling tumbler, when he saw her stand up. She handed her clutch to Lazaridis, whispered something, and began walking, not toward the restrooms, but toward the glass doors leading to the west terrace. This was it. He set his glass down, nearly shattering it. He murmured something to Catherine about fresh air, and followed. He moved too quickly, shoving past a bewildered-looking councilman. He didn't care. He burst through the doors onto the terrace. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. The terrace overlooked Central Park, a vast, dark ocean of trees under the city lights. She was there at the far end, her back to him, staring out over the park. The gold armor on her dress gleamed in the moonlight. Elara. His voice was a raw croak. She didn't turn. You shouldn't be out here, Julian. What is this? He demanded, stalking toward her. The alcohol made him brave, or perhaps just stupid. What in God's name is this? Is this a game? Some kind of sick joke? She turned slowly. The amused light was gone from her eyes. Now there was just a profound glacial cold. A joke, she repeated. No, Julian, this is due diligence. The words hung in the air. Due diligence. The Lazaridis Fund was considering a partnership. She said, her voice flat, as if explaining a simple math problem to a very slow child. A significant allocation, $10 billion to your emerging markets division. A test, you might say. Julian's blood ran cold, the whiskey turning to acid in his stomach. A test. We needed to know who exactly we were getting into business with. Not the company, Julian. The man. The man at the top. The one who signs the papers. She took a step toward him. So I was assigned to perform a character assessment. Julian recoiled. Assigned you were this whole time. You seduced me for a report. Elara laughed. It was not the light, tinkling laugh he remembered from the apartment. It was a sharp, cold, brittle sound that echoed off the glass. Oh, Julian, don't flatter yourself. I didn't seduce you. I didn't have to. I just appeared. I held up a mirror, and you practically climbed inside it. You were so desperate to feel powerful, so desperate to find someone you thought was beneath you, that you never once stopped to ask a single real question about me. She began to circle him slowly like a predator. You didn't discover me at that gallery, Julian. I chose that gallery because I knew your firm's art consultant bought from them. I accidentally spilled a drink on you. I created Elara Vance, the struggling artist, in a single weekend. The apartment, it's a Lazaridis corporate property. The cheap wine you educated me on. It was Chateau Margaux. You just couldn't tell the difference. Every word was a nail in his coffin. But why? He stammered. Why go on for 6 months? Why this, at first it was just business. I needed to know, are you a liability? Are you discreet? Are you loyal? It took me about 2 weeks to get the answer. You're none of those things. He flinched. You talk, Julian. She said, her voice dropping to a whisper. God, how you talked. You were so proud of yourself. You told me everything. His heart stopped. What do you mean? I mean, she said, stopping directly in front of him, that you told me about the creative accounting you used to handle that SEC inquiry last spring. You told me about the undeclared offshore accounts you used to test market liquidity, which, by the way, is just a fancy term for front-running your own clients. You bragged about how you manage your partners by holding their old mistakes over their heads. And my personal favorite, you told me in excruciating detail how you find your wife's old money sensibilities so dull, and how you've been siphoning funds from her family's trust, the one you manage, for years. Julian couldn't breathe. You were recording me. It wasn't a question. Every single word, she confirmed. The charming apartment. It's wired for sound and video, like a network television studio. We vet our partners, Julian. We don't invest in criminals. And you are a common, arrogant, and frankly unimaginative criminal. You're going to... Who have you told? His voice was a desperate, thin whine. My report on your character, or lack thereof, was on Damien's desk 3 months ago. The $10 billion offer was, of course, immediately rescinded. Then, why? Julian pleaded, his mind shattering. Why keep seeing me? Why come here tonight? Elara leaned in, her eyes boring into his. The scent of her perfume, something dark and expensive like jasmine and ash, filled his lungs. Because that Julian, she whispered, was personal. My report was done, but I wasn't. I wanted to see how far a man like you would go to ruin himself. I wanted to see if you'd actually be arrogant enough to bring your mistress to your wife's own ball. I wanted to see the look on your face when the little ball you thought you were playing with turned out to be the wrecking ball for your entire life. She smiled, a true, genuine smile. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. You passed Julian, with flying colors. You're even more pathetic than I wrote in my report. He grabbed her arm. You bitch! You can't! I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone. Tell them what? She said, not even looking at his hand on her arm. That your mistress was a plant, that you confessed to multiple felonies, that you're a fraud. Please, Julian. Do it. She looked pointedly at his white-knuckled grip. Now take your hand off me. You're creasing the velvet. He let go as if her arm had burned him. Just then, the terrace doors opened. It wasn't Julian's partners. It wasn't his wife. It was two of Lazaridis's security men. Is there a problem here, Ms. Vance? One of them asked, his voice polite, but his hand resting inside his jacket. Ilara smoothed her sleeve. No problem at all, gentlemen. Mr. Thorne was just congratulating me on the hospital donation. Weren't you Julian? Julian was mute. He was a dead man. I believe, she said, my comprehensive file was delivered to your board of directors and to Mr. Davenport about 30 minutes ago. Right when I was shaking your hand. I'd imagine your phone is quite busy right now. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom, her heels clicking on the stone with the finality of a gavel. Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Thorne. Julian stood frozen on the terrace, the cool night air suddenly feeling like a suffocating shroud. The sound of Ilara's heels, a sharp, imperious click-clack-click on the stone, faded as she re-entered the ballroom. It was the sound of a countdown timer hitting 0. His mind, usually a fortress of calculations and strategy, was a roaring white static. She's bluffing, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. It's a threat. Blackmail. A power play. He had to get to Harding. He had to get to his lawyer. He had to call someone. He plunged his hand into the inner pocket of his tuxedo for his real phone, his lifeline, his connection to the world, to his power. He pulled it out his thumb, already swiping at the blank black screen. Nothing. He mashed the power button. Once. Twice. Nothing. The screen was dead. Utterly black. A cold, sickening lurch hit his stomach. He remembered with the clarity of a death sentence, seeing the 20% battery warning 4 hours ago. He'd ignored it. He had been too busy texting Ilara on the burner phone, the secret phone, the toy. He had been so consumed with the fantasy of his secret life that he had let his real life, the one tethered to that dead piece of glass and metal, die in his pocket. The symbolism was so brutal, so precise, it was almost elegant. A wave of pure animal panic seized him. He turned and bolted for the terrace doors. He had to find Harding. He had to see. He burst back into the grand ballroom. The scene that greeted him was not the one he had left. The orchestra was still playing a light, meaningless Vivaldi, but it was now a soundtrack to a massacre. The vibrant, confident hum of conversation had ceased. It was replaced by a tense, electric silence, broken by clusters of frantic, sibilant whispers. And everyone was looking at him. As he stood in the doorway, a ripple of silence and recognition spread. People turned. Faces he had known for 20 years, bankers, judges, socialites, looked at him, their expressions a horrifying mix of shock, pity, and a new, thrilling reptilian contempt. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the Rainmaker. He was a spectacle. He was the kill. He saw phones out their screens glowing. They weren't taking pictures. They were reading. It's real. Oh God, it's real. His eyes scanned desperate and found the epicenter of the blast. By the grand staircase, in a tight funereal knot, stood his partners, Harding and Walsh. With them was his wife Catherine and her father, Harrison Davenport. Harrison Davenport was the true patriarch of the family, a man of iron and old money who had tolerated Julian as a necessary, if vulgar, asset. Harrison was reading something on his own phone. His face, usually a polite, neutral mask, was carved from ice. Julian stumbled toward them, his legs feeling like they were moving through wet cement. Catherine. Harrison. Listen. His voice was a dry croak. Harding looked up first. His face, normally ruddy and cheerful, was a ghostly, sweating white. He looked like he'd just seen a public execution. Julian? Harding whispered, taking a step toward him, his hands held up as if to ward off a leper. But it was Harrison Davenport who moved. He didn't look at Julian. He simply coolly handed his phone to Catherine, who had been staring at her father's back. Her face a mask of confusion. Harrison, Julian pleaded, listen to me, it's a setup, a lie. That woman. Harrison turned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words were quiet, precise, and carried the weight of a guillotine. Robert, he said, his eyes fixed on Harding, completely ignoring Julian's existence. You have 60 seconds to remove this thing from my daughter's event before my personal security does it for you. Handle it. He then turned his back on Julian, a complete, a final, and utter dismissal. Julian, for God's sake, you have to go. Now. Harding hissed, grabbing Julian's arm, his fingers digging in like claws. What did she send? Julian snarled, his panic turning to rage. It's blackmail, Rob. We fight this. We get our lawyers. Fight it. Harding's voice cracked into a near scream. The whispers around them intensified. Fight what, Julian? It's not an email. It's a goddamn data dump. She sent it to the entire board, to the SEC's public tip line, to the Wall Street Journal. It's everything. What is everything? Audiophile's Julian Harding was shaking him now, his terror making him strong. Audio of you in that apartment, bragging you bragged about the offshore test fund in Cayman. You bragged about front-running the pension accounts. Oh my God, Julian. You bragged by name about how you manage Catherine's trust fund. She sent transcripts. She sent routing numbers. She sent video, Julian. They have video. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Julian's mind flashed to the apartment, to the mirrors, to the small, innocuous Art Deco clock on the mantelpiece. A hidden lens. His own reflection, arrogant and boasting, while Elara E.A. Vance listened, her eyes wide with fake adoration. He turned desperate to the last person who mattered. Catherine. She was staring at the phone Harrison had given her. Her face was bloodless. She was scrolling, reading the transcripts of his betrayal, her own husband's voice, bragging about stealing from her, about finding her dull. Catherine, please, he begged, taking a step toward her. It's not what it looks like. She's a corporate spy. She trapped me. You have to believe me. Catherine so slowly lifted her head. He had expected tears. He had expected screams. He was prepared for hysteria. He was not prepared for the look in her eyes. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was a cold, pure, unforgiving hatred that vaporized the last 30 years of his life. She looked at him, not as her husband, but as something verminous, something she had found, infesting her home. You, she said. Her voice was a low, shaking whisper that was louder than any scream. "You disgust me." She didn't throw the phone. She didn't slap him. She simply let the phone fall from her hand as if it were contaminated. She turned not to him, but to her father, and buried her face in his shoulder, her body racked with a single violent sob of revulsion. That was it. The final blade. "Get him out!" Harrison Davenport commanded, his voice rumbling with quiet thunder. "Julian, go!" Harding shoved him hard. "The board has been called. The morals clause is invoked. You're out. Suspended done. We're ruined. Now get out." The hotel security guards, men who had bowed and scraped to him just an hour before, were suddenly at his elbows. Their grips were polite, but their fingers were steel. "Mr. Thorne, this way, sir." He was being escorted, evicted. He was a pariah, a walking plague. He was marched, his feet leaden through the parting sea of whispers, out of the ballroom, through the gilded lobby, past the staring, horrified faces of the city's elite. He was deposited on the sidewalk. The grand doors of the plaza hissed shut behind him, sealing him out of his own life. He was alone. He started to walk. He had no destination. He just walked. He was a ghost in his own city. The skyscrapers he had once considered his kingdom now loomed over him like tombstones, their lights mocking him. He walked for hours, his mind a roaring void. He walked until the black sky began to bleed a filthy grey, then a sick, watery pink. He found himself on a bench in Central Park, the damp air chilling him to the bone. He was still in his tuxedo, a dead man in evening wear. A vibration. It wasn't his real phone. It was in his pants pocket. The burner phone. The cheap, anonymous device. The only thing in the world that still worked. The instrument of his destruction. His fingers, numb and trembling, pulled it out. The screen was bright obscene in the dawn light. One new message. From Ilara. It wasn't text. It was a link. A Bloomberg news alert posted seconds ago. He clicked it. Headline: Lazaridis Fund. Scraps 10B US initiative. Cites catastrophic ethical failure at Thorne and Harding. He read the article. It was an execution. It detailed with surgical precision how an internal compliance and character audit, Ilara's report, had uncovered insurmountable ethical liabilities at the senior executive level. It spoke of a culture of profound arrogance and deceit directly implicating managing partner Julian Thorne. The $10 billion wasn't just gone. It had been publicly, pointedly and devastatingly reallocated to a rival European fund, a direct public slap in the face to New York and to him. He wasn't just ruined. He was a headline. He was the reason. He looked at the article. He looked at the burner phone in his hand. He thought of her on the terrace. The little ball you thought you were playing with turned out to be the wrecking ball. He finally truly understood. The affair, the bonus, the secret apartment, none of it was the point. This was the point. The news alert, the public financial execution. She hadn't just seduced him to get secrets. She had seduced him to make him the fuse. The affair wasn't the weapon. It was just the delivery system for the bomb. He laughed, a dry, broken, rattling sound in the dawn air. He had thought he was the master of the universe. He was just the ball, and she had just used him to shatter the entire game. The sun rose on the second day of Julian Thorne's new life. He watched it from the same park bench, a grey, indifferent light filtering through the trees. His tuxedo, once a $10,000 armor of success, was now a wrinkled, damp shroud smelling of sweat, spilled whiskey, and the loamy earth he had at some point in the night collapsed onto. He was no longer in shock. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving behind a cold, hollow cavity in his chest. He was a creature of pure primal function. Survive. Think. Fix. He fumbled for his real phone, the one he'd ignored. He'd found a charging port in a public restroom kiosk hours ago, siphoning power like a vagrant. He turned it on. The screen lit up, and with it, his world ended. Not in a single explosion, but in a rapid-fire succession of digital executions. First, the notifications. HSBC Private Banking 4. 12 a.m. alert. Your accounts have been placed on a security hold, pending an external investigation. All access is temporarily suspended. Morgan Stanley 4. 13 a.m. alert. Your joint assets with C.D. Thorne have been transferred, and the account frozen effective immediately per court order. Thorne and Harding 4. 15 a.m. Your corporate access credentials have been revoked. Your network account has been permanently disabled. He tried to open his banking app. Access denied. He tried to open his corporate email. User not recognized. He was digitally vaporized. He had $0. The few hundred in cash in his wallet was all that existed of his former fortune. A new email pinged on his personal non-burner account. It was from the board of his building. Subject notice of default and immediate eviction. The email, clinically polite, informed him that per the building's bylaws, his violation of the morals clause, as detailed in documents provided by Mrs. Thorne's legal team, terminated his lease. Security had been instructed not to allow him entry. A service would be provided to pack his personal effects, not including any art furniture or assets deemed community property for collection at a later date. He was homeless. Julian laughed, a dry, rattling, broken sound that made a passing jogger give him a wide berth. He was Julian Thorne. He had built an empire. This was a procedural error, a misunderstanding, a hostile, illegal maneuver by Lazaridis. He would fix this. He would go to the office. He would talk to Harding. Harding was weak. Harding would listen. He would go home, talk to Catherine. She was emotional, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't detonate her own life to spite him. He stood his body screaming in protest and began the long walk from the park to his penthouse. He didn't make it to the door. He was a block away when he saw the black Escalade parked at the service entrance. He saw men not in suits, but in practical work jumpsuits, carrying large, flat art crates out of his building. They were moving his de Kooning. Then he saw the doorman, Miguel, a man Julian had tipped $500 every Christmas for 10 years. Miguel saw him approaching. Julian raised a hand, ready to bluster to command. Miguel didn't meet his eye. He simply almost imperceptibly shook his head and stepped in front of the revolving door, his posture unyielding. He didn't have to say a word. Julian Thorne was not a resident. He was a threat. Humiliation, hot and acidic, flooded his throat. He turned his face burning and walked away. He needed a phone. He needed a lawyer. He needed Harding. He walked downtown, a man in a ruined tuxedo, drawing stares of pity and disgust. He reached the glass and steel tower of Thorne and Harding Capital. He was prepared for the lobby security. He was not prepared for the television. A massive screen in the lobby, usually playing a silent loop of market data, was tuned to Bloomberg. And on the screen was his partner, his friend, Robert Harding. Harding was at a press conference. He looked pale, grave, and statesmanlike. The chyron beneath him read, "Thorne and Harding forcibly removes CEO, pledges full cooperation with SSE probe." A complete and total shock. Harding was saying, his voice resonant with practiced sincerity. The board was made aware of Mr. Thorne's rogue actions and deplorable breach of trust late last night. We have acted swiftly. His employment has been terminated, his access revoked, and we have proactively opened our books to the SEC and the DA as office to prove that this betrayal was the act of one man and one man alone. One man alone. Julian stood on the sidewalk watching his life's work, his partner, his name, throw him to the wolves to save the firm. He was the scapegoat, the sacrifice. "Sir," a security guard had stepped out of the building. "Sir, you can't loiter here." Julian looked at the guard, a young man he wouldn't have noticed 2 days ago. He saw the recognition in the guard's eyes. He wasn't just a loiterer. He was a disgrace. Julian turned and walked. He had no destination. He just walked. He walked for hours. He crossed the bridge into Queens. The city he had once seen as his kingdom now felt like an alien, hostile landscape. The noise, the smells, the sheer indifferent crush of people, it was all an assault. He was no longer Julian Thorne. He was a ghost, haunting a city that had already forgotten him. At some point, he realized the tuxedo was a liability. It was a target. He used the last of his cash at a discount men's warehouse. He changed in the filthy bathroom, leaving the $10,000 Tom Ford in a heap on the floor. He emerged in a cheap, grey, polyester blend suit that hung on his frame, the fabric rough against his skin. He looked in the cracked mirror. A stranger looked back, a tired, defeated, middle-aged man with haunted eyes. He walked again. The endless, anonymous streets of Queens. He was drawn not by a plan, but by a dull, magnetic pull. An instinct. He was a wounded animal crawling back to the place of his mortal injury. That's when he found himself on a street corner, staring through a chain-link fence. On the other side was the private aviation terminal for LaGuardia. And that's when he heard it. It wasn't the guttural roar of a 737. It was a sound he knew intimately. It was the sound of power, the high, piercing, impossibly smooth whine of twin Rolls-Royce BR-725 engines. It was the sound of a Gulf Stream. He looked up, his heart seizing in his chest. Descending from the low grey clouds, sleek and predatory as a shark's tooth, was a Gulf Stream G650. It was bone white, with a single dark blue stripe down its fuselage. On the tail he could just make out the minimalist stylized L of the Lazaridis Fund. It was the same jet. It didn't just land. It alighted. It touched the runway with a grace that seemed to defy its size and weight, a whisper of white smoke rising from the tires. It was the most beautiful, most expensive, most insulting thing he had ever seen. It taxied not to the main terminal, but to a private hangar, set far apart from the others. Julian didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't thinking. He was just moving. He ran. He scrambled along the fence line, his cheap shoes slipping on the gravel, his breath tearing at his lungs. He was desperate. For what? To yell, to scream, to bear witness to his own execution. He reached a spot on the fence, directly across the tarmac from the jet. He gripped the chain links, his knuckles turning white, the cold metal biting into his palms. The jet's engines spooled down into a low, satisfied hum. The air stairs unfolded a perfect, elegant carpeted ramp to the heavens. A black armored Maybach, the same one from the ball, purred onto the tarmac and stopped at the base of the stairs. The door of the Gulf Stream opened. First, Damien Lazaridis emerged. He was not in a suit. He wore a simple, obscenely expensive-looking cashmere sweater and dark slacks. He looked rested calm, like a man who had just concluded a particularly satisfying piece of business. He walked down the stairs, looked at his watch, and got into the back of the Maybach, leaving the door open. He was waiting. And then she stepped into the doorway. Julian's breath hitched. This was not the spectre from the ball. This was not the vulnerable artist. This was the third version, the executive, the blade. She was wearing impeccably tailored black trousers, a simple cream-colored silk blouse, and dark, oversized sunglasses. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, practical, and devastatingly elegant ponytail. She held a slim leather satchel in one hand and her phone in the other. She was in the middle of a call. She paused on the top step, still talking, gesturing with her free hand. She was giving orders. She was in that moment the most powerful person Julian had ever seen. She was everything he had pretended to be. She finished her call, slipped the phone into her pocket, and took a deep breath, as if tasting the air of her new conquest. Julian stood at the fence, a pathetic broken creature in a cheap suit shivering in the wind. He was 200 yards away. A speck. A piece of roadside trash. There was no way she could see him. It was impossible. She started to descend the stairs, then she stopped. She turned her head, her body angled toward the Maybach, but her head turned left. She turned it directly toward the fence line, directly toward the exact spot where Julian was standing. He froze. She can't see me. She can't. She slowly, deliberately raised her hand and lifted the sunglasses, resting them on top of her head. Her eyes, cold and clear as diamonds, scanned the fence. And then they stopped. They locked onto his, across the vast expanse of tarmac, through the shimmering jet exhaust he knew. She saw him. She saw the cheap suit. She saw the defeat. She saw the ruin. Julian's entire being recoiled. He wanted to run, to hide, to die. He was pinned by her gaze, a bug on a board. And then she did it. She smiled. It was not the cold, terrifying smile of the terrace. It was not the polite, icy smile of the ballroom. It was the other smile. It was the smile from the East Village apartment. The wide-eyed, adoring, slightly breathless smile of Ilara Vance. The smile that had promised him vulnerability and compliance and escape. The smile he had bought. The smile that had damned him. She held it for 3 agonizing, eternal seconds. It was a performance. A final, brilliant, devastating curtain call. It was a message sent with surgical precision across the distance. This is what you wanted. This is the lie you believed. This is the mask I wore to destroy you. And I can put it on and take it off whenever I please. You were not a predator. You were not even a client. You were a job. And the job is done. The smile vanished. E.A. Vance was back. She put her sunglasses on her face, becoming an impassive, beautiful mask once more. She turned, descended the remaining stairs with fluid, unhurried grace, and got into the Maybach. The door shut with a heavy, silent thunk. The car did not speed away. It pulled away smoothly, accelerating with the confident, quiet power of a machine that had nothing to prove. It disappeared onto the parkway, heading back to the city she now owned. Julian Thorne was left clutching the fence. His hands were numb. The jet's engines were silent, but the wine was still screaming in his head. The tarmac was empty, save for the white, silent Gulf Stream, a monument to his obliteration. He had thought it was just a game with his mistress. He thought she was Cinderella. He never realized she owned the castle, the coach, and the billionaire, too. He was left with nothing but the echo of her laugh, the memory of that final, poisonous smile, and the long, cold contrail of her jet, already a memory in the grey, unforgiving sky. He sank to his knees on the gravel, a king of nothing outside the fence of a world that had erased him. Julian Thorne's arrogance wrote a check his reality couldn't cash. He saw Ilara as a supporting character in his own grand story, a ball to be played with. He never realized that to her, he was just one small, ugly line item in a multi-billion-dollar audit. She didn't just break his heart or his marriage. She dismantled his entire world piece by piece, using his own ego as the primary tool. The powerful don't always look powerful. Sometimes they're the quiet ones in the gallery, the ones you underestimate, the ones who are just waiting. Julian learned that the hard way. He thought he was the shark, but he was swimming in an ocean that belonged to a leviathan. What did you think of Ilara's ultimate revenge? Was it brilliant, or was it too cold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about power, betrayal, and fortunes lost, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and most importantly, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.